Okay, we're going to share some views on tying up. It's a big subject and it's a lot more in depth than just taking a horse and tying it to something. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it before you get to that point, but I'll just share a couple little points before we get going, a couple of concepts. Now, firstly, there are two opposing points of view. When it comes to tying up, we have those people that will say, don't ever tie to anything that won't break. And we have those that say, don't ever tie to anything that will break. So you can see they're completely the opposite. Now, I believe from my own experiences, and I've been fortunate enough to work horses in 19 different countries and be around a lot of different horse cultures. So from my own experience, what I see is that if you're in a situation or a culture where you would, if you lost your horse, you would lose your life, they tend to hard tie. That is, tie them to something that won't break. The horse can't get away. If you're in a culture where it doesn't really matter too much, your horse gets away, you can walk down the road and go to the local pub, you know, it doesn't seem to be such a big deal, and we seem to have that time to something that can break type deal. Now, there's pros and cons to both of those. And we must think that in order to tie a horse, no matter how we're going to do it, we need to prepare them. But whatever we do, there are strategies and habits that will increase your chance of success, and there are strategies and habits that will decrease your chances of success. Now, that doesn't mean that if you choose to habitually do something that is less likely to work, that it won't work for you in any given instance. And that also doesn't mean that if you choose habits and strategies that give you a greater chance of success, you may have an event that doesn't work out so well. So we're looking at the averages of this. We're looking to try and get the percentages on our side, because at the end of the day, it can be pretty dangerous to tie a horse up. So I'm going to share some things with you that you really need to know before we get to talking about preparing horses to get to this point. To increase your chance of success tying horses up, you tie them short. That's one. And by short, I mean that they cannot eat the grass. And I know for a lot of people, it's a well-meaning point of view that you want them to be able to graze and, you know, get around, put something in their belly. If they can reach the ground, they can get themselves into a lot of trouble. So they're more likely to get themselves into trouble doing that. They're more likely to get their foot over it. They're more likely to get it wrapped around their head. One of my personal favorites is they get it wrapped around their head, then put their foot over it, and then try and lift their head up, and it all goes a bit wrong after that. So we tie high, and what that means, or rather tie short, what that means is their head is higher at about rest. That's about all the rope they have. Okay, so they can't get it low because they're tied short. Now, the other thing we're going to do here, number two, is also about high, but we want to tie high. We want to have a high pull point. So we want the pull point to be above their withers for optimal results. If we tie them to something below their wither height, which is usually the average hitching rail, what that means is they can sit back and put a lot of pressure on that and do themselves quite a lot of damage. This spot that takes most of the pressure is a lot more sensitive than you may realize and can really damage them. So the higher the pull point, the better. I'll give you what I consider to be an optimal type tying situation. Whilst this is quite good, the optimal would be you have something like a high line, which might be a wire rope between two very high points. You might have a rope or a chain coming down from that with a swivel on it. Particularly if you don't have a swivel on your halter, you need a swivel on that chain or that rope you're going to tie them to. That way they've got a 360-degree view. They can walk underneath it. They can walk around and around in circles if they need to. If they go back on it, there's nothing going to get caught up on them. It's the optimum tying position. So we're going to work towards how to develop them and how to prepare them towards hard tying, which also means we need to have a step there where we're maybe not quite ready to hard tie. so we have a strategy for what we can do under those conditions. So coming up, some preparations. Okay, when we think about preparing for tying up, there are two categories we need to look at. One, we need to have a horse that it's hard to get him to spook. Two, we need to have a horse that responds really well to steady pressure, to a feel, okay, directly on them. So what we know is that when horses feel threatened, they push into pressure. They go against the feel. So if we can limit the likelihood of him getting threatened, getting startled, getting spooked, we're already further ahead. If we can develop and increase his propensity to yield to steady pressure, we're already ahead. So we're setting it up to where he gets maximum chances of getting this done. Okay, maximum chance of success. So there are all sorts of things that are going to happen potentially. And I can tell you, being on a farm, they're not always quiet places. There's people chainsawing, there's trees coming down, there's vehicles of all sorts of descriptions at different times of the year going on. There's gunfire. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can happen. And when you're at an event, a situation that you can't control, there's other people with horses, other people with different mindsets about how they do things. There's all sorts of things going to go on. We just need to prepare them as best we can. So I want to get to where I can do a lot and it causes minimal disruption to him. He's not going to get too bothered by it. Now Max here, of course, he's not one of our young horses. Max is rising 13 now, so he's a little more developed, a little more mature, so we get to show you some of the things that we might look at. Very simply, and you've probably all done things like this, we use motion and sensation. Are they okay with something touching them, swinging around them? And not just swinging around here, but something goes around their leg. Somebody's newspaper gets rattled in the wind and blows along and sticks to their front legs, their back legs. We don't want that to be a spook situation that's going to cause them to pull back. So we do all sorts of little things like this. We want to be able to do these type of things till we know it's not going to bother them. Things going overhead, not a big deal. And you'll start wherever you start. And there's lots of opportunities to learn how to do these type of things. So this is just really a demonstration of some of the things you might want to cover before you think about tying a horse up. There's all sorts of things, isn't there, Max? So we've got our little flag here, our tatty old flag that we use on a daily basis. We will use it for a bit of communication, but also we need to be able to get to where you're okay all over the body, with it touching, with it not touching, with it coming towards, with it going away. Check out the various zones. All sorts of things could happen. We can get some bigger flags. We can do something like this. Wind is going to be a factor. It's going to be unpredictable at times. All sorts of things are going to happen. So it is worth investing the time into getting to where our horse can handle a lot of motion. The three categories you're going to work on here really: sensation, motion, and sound. So you might take the chain off your chainsaw. You might see if they can cope with that. You might get some gunfire, or maybe if you don't want to go shooting around your horse, get a little stock whip like this. Now I'm not particularly good with a stock whip back, so close your eyes. We don't want to lose them. The idea here, obviously we've got some motion. Can we do it left-handed? I'm not sure. Oof. I don't know, that startled me, but we've got some sudden movement there, we've got some sudden noise. All those sort of things, they should be okay should be able to handle before we put them in a situation where they can't get away, they can't get into flight. Now that does move us naturally into the next part, is if we're going to restrict them, they need to have a really good relationship with steady pressure, particularly around here, which is going to take the brunt of it should they go back, and it's very natural for them to do that. So you will have done things like this, I hope, anyway. Things like applying a feel, asking them to go back. We want them to get to where they go backwards, come forwards, getting lighter, Max, not heavier. There we go. A couple of little things I like to be able to do is I like to be able to lower their head, which for you is very low, and walk off without creating a pullback. If your horse does this, it is called pulling back. Okay, it's just the degree that varies. So you might have a high tolerance for that. Well, your horse does this, and you say, oh, that's okay. It's not if you're going to tie them up. So can we walk along a little bit here first, and as we're in motion, can I lower your head? And this really has nothing to do with having his head down low. It's how well can he follow a feel, even when he's in motion, even when it's a bit awkward for him to do it. Can we change the game on him a little bit here? So I would do all sorts of things to set it up to where he really understood follow a feel. You could lead him by the leg. You could circle him around there with something attached to his leg, stop him from a hind leg. You know, there's all sorts of things you can do to help him understand that concept of yielding to steady pressure, but particularly here, because this is going to be very important for us. So when it comes to leading, if I put a little feel in there, I want to see him come off it. Now you might start with something like that, and what would be very natural is they're walking along, when you put a feel in it, the head goes back like this. This is, it's going to happen most of the time when you start out. But we want to get to a point where you're walking along, as soon as you put a feel in there, they try and come off it. Okay? So walk along, little feel, comes off the feel. If need be, I'd support that. I'd put some energy behind his drive line to support it, but I'd feel first, then I'd support it. Because it's about that. It's about following a feel. It's about that steady pressure that could be going anywhere. Thinking how good is he at following it and following that feel. So when you think about what could happen when we tie them up, horses can run past, other horses could spook, break loose, run past. There could be all sorts of things. Flaming drone could crash beside them. We don't know. This is when they're going to be under a lot of pressure, so we want them to be able to have the tools to cope with it. So when it comes to tying, one of the strategies we could do that would just about guarantee we have trouble is we tie here. Doesn't matter whether we wrap it, whether we knot it, however we go about it. If you tie them to a rail, it is going to end badly at some point in your life, even if you get away with it now. I don't know if you've seen it, I certainly have. You have a horse that pulls back, they break the rail, maybe they take a fence post with it, but they break that rail, they pull back, they're scared, of course the rail goes towards them, they turn, they start running, now the rail's chasing them. Where do they go? To other horses. So you've got a group of riders there, they run straight to the other horses for security. Now you've got a horse with a rail attached to it, banging around its legs, running towards the other horse. It's a disaster, okay? Just flat out don't do it. So we're not going to tie to rails, full stop. It doesn't work. We're not going to tie to park benches. We're not going to tie, yes, they can pick park benches up very easily and drag them all around the place. No, we're not going to tie to those type of things. But we've got to this point here where we're going to tie. I would suggest after your preparations, however long that might take, everything's going well, that your first experience tying up isn't a sink or swim. And it's only about tying up. So it's not about introducing them to a new environment. It's not about introducing them to separation anxiety. So what I like to do here is bring them somewhere they're familiar with, have a buddy here with them, somewhere close by, then we'll do something here. Now, given what we've got, which is a 70mm bit of steel rail, I can wrap around this pipe. So to show you what I mean by that, if we wrap, this is what I would refer to as a supervised tying strategy. If I can move it, the horse can move it very easily. So I'll put another one in. How many wraps? It depends on the thickness of your pipe there, of your rail. It depends on the type of rope you're using. It even depends if that's a new rope or an old rope. Makes a difference, so you have to get a bit of a feel for it. Now that looks like it can move pretty easily. It's going to put enough drag in it to maybe get him to think about it. But it's a supervised first tying. In other words, I'm going to be working in this environment. If he was to pull back, what would happen is he would drag this, it would get a bit longer, and he'd get further and further away from the stimulus, from whatever was causing him to do that. The pressure would come off the moment he came forward. So it's not like having a bungee or a piece of elastic or an inner tube there where they go back on it, and when they come forward, it's still pulling on them, and they've got to make a big bit of movement to get back. So we go about it like this, and yes, you could have a longer line if you wanted to, but the idea is you're not going to go start up your vehicle, drive into town, do your grocery shopping. We're going to be handy, and I'm going to do this after I've ridden him or worked him. So we're going to be moving around and be riding him. He's probably going to be at a point where he'd go, I'd like to stand still now, because we've done some work together, he's exercised. He'd like to stand still. So we bring him over to an area he's familiar with. He's got one of his buddies here, and we'll wrap him and leave him. If I'm going to leave him for any significant period of time, as I sometimes do, I will have something like a hay net or similar, something he can't get a nose in or a foot in, something small holes, something off the ground, so he's got something to chew on. This little deal here, this pawing, almost guaranteed you're going to have a horse that does that the first few times. The other thing, they might chew on whatever you've got them tied to, so they play around with it. Again, that's one of the reasons why a high tie is your best option, is your optimal option. But they might fidget around and turn this way and turn that way and do all these type of things. I quite like them understanding they can move. They're less likely to pull back if they know they can move, so it doesn't do any harm to come in here and let him know that he can move over a little bit. He can change his position, that type of deal. And we'll go away and we'll go about our business, and if he's pawing and fidgeting and doing those things, we leave him alone. Just leave him alone. You don't have to be involved, nothing to do with you, leave him alone. When he's standing quietly, when he's standing nicely, that's the time to come and say, hey, how about we leave now? Okay, so I would do this as an exercise. I would not just do it when I needed to do it, you know, for the first time, and be in a different environment with horses doing other things and all things going on, go, gee, I need to tie my horse up. We will have practiced this at home. And of course, the more familiar he gets with this, the more of a pattern it becomes to him, the less need we have to do it after I've ridden him. I can get a couple of my horses, tie them up, ride one, do the other, come back, swap. We're also in the position there that we now don't need another horse there. Then we can start going in different places, different areas, tying up after that. So it's a progression. And like every exercise we do, the more perfect practice we put into it, the more progress we get. So I hope there's a few things there that are going to help you make some choices that are going to optimize your success, and you can take advantage of this very practical exercise. Okay, so let's just have a quick chat about hard tying versus the other thing, not hard tying. There are times when you just flat out are not ready to hard tie your horse. Yeah, in this early stages, I wrap because we're not used to it yet. We're not practiced it yet. We're not ready to hard tie, and I don't want to put my horse in a sink or swim situation. But my goal is to hard tie. That's my goal, is to get to a point where I can hard tie. Now there'll be times when I'm out and about, and it's not practical to do that. It's difficult to do that, or just don't really feel good about doing it. So often we use one of these type of things. This is one of our well-used blocker ties. There are variations of this theme. They've been copied a bit, but this is really it. A little bit of magnet in there, and something like this you can put on the side of your trailer. You can clip up there, and it's a little bit like wrapping, where they can get a release, but it doesn't come all the way out. So if you just take your rope, push it through here like so, clip that up, you've now got enough friction to slow things down a bit. Okay, so much like the wrapping, they can go back on it, give themselves more length. When they come forward, it's immediate release. So again, it's a supervised situation. I wouldn't tie a horse like this and leave him overnight. I wouldn't wrap a horse, leave him overnight. That's for hard tie, okay? And this to me is much preferable to what in this part of the world is very common, and that's the baling twine approach. So we tie baling twine to here or here, and we attach them to the baling twine, and the horse could get to pulling back, it snaps, and they get a release for doing what? For pulling back, which only encourages that behavior. It's what we don't want, and we're encouraging them to now do it by offering the release at that point. So boom, down they go. And next time they go again. So I'm not even going to entertain that idea. I'm going to set up a process to where they understand restriction, they understand how to follow a feel, they're good at steady pressure, very hard to spook. That's what we're aiming for. But something like this could be a good intermediate step, or something you use when you feel like the situation warrants it. Okay, so if we're at that point where we're going to hard tie, then the question is, what knot to know? What knot should I use? Now, what knot you choose to use is going to depend on a few factors. Number one, what you're tying to. So this rail here is put in specifically for what we call the John Wayne knot, or at least it was introduced to me as the John Wayne knot. I've since learned that there are various themes to that, various different John Wayne knots. John Wayne knot, bank robber's knot is what we know it by. So what we want to do is have a quick release knot that's also a clean release knot. So there's a lot of quick release knots that by the time you pull it, you're holding a piece of rope that's on the opposite side to the horse. So there's still, if they're doing something here, you've got to get to this other side real quick. So what we want to do is quick release, clean release, and make sure it's at least a 3-bite knot, because if it's not, it can be pulled tight really, really quickly. Okay, and it doesn't matter what it looks like when nobody's pulling on it. If you get something that's a 2-bite knot and you start pulling, you're not going to undo it. It's not going to be a quick release, okay, not when there's pressure on it. So this knot is the one that I favor for this type of situation. It's good up to about 100 mils. So that would be up to about then. Then there just isn't enough bite on it, and we go to something like a Stockman's bowline. Let me show you this one first. So very simply, obviously, black halter, horse's head. So I'm going to take my rope here, I'm just going to fold it and put it over. So I'll do this kind of slow, and I'll make it a little bigger and a little more obvious than I usually would, but just so we can follow along. Now we've got one piece that's attached to the horse, one piece that's not attached to the horse. And at this point, if they pull back, you don't want to have your fingers in there, do you? So you're very cautious about that. So you take the piece that's not attached to the horse, put it behind, like so. Next thing, I'm going to put it in front and behind the horse's piece. Keep my fingers out of that. Now if I just fold this here and send it through there, we're going to have our knot. So we'll do that. Now it is, whilst it's not a good practice to start practicing putting your hands through these loops, actually you're the only one that can tighten that. So we pull that there, this is about 70 mils, and you get a bit of a bite on it, like so. Now the horse that's attached at the end of this hitching rail here, he might want to play around with this and he can undo it himself. So what we do is we drop a little half hitch, put that into the half hitch, and there we have it. It's still a quick release knot if the human isn't stupid. So the human just takes it from behind and pulls, and away it comes. Okay, so this is the bank robbers or John Wayne knot with optional lock half hitch, and you're done. So that's my preferred knot for this type of rail. So just really quickly, we're going to throw in another knot. If you're in a situation where what you have to tie to is thicker than this, knowing that your knot that I've just shown you here isn't going to have enough bite to it, then what we'd do is we'd go to the stockman's bowline. Now there are variations here. This isn't going to be the clean release that this one is, that the old John Wayne is. Let's pretend we have a branch we've got to tie them to. So there's a big old thick branch, and it's a sturdy tree, and it doesn't look like a tree that he's going to be able to break the branch off. So what we'd do is we'd throw this over, and if we throw it over again, we get more friction, and it just stops them putting a lot of pressure onto the knot itself. So we'd do this little deal here, which is like a little half hitch. If you think of this as being the center of your knot, you're pushing that towards the center. So we've got a loop in here now. Okay, and I might go once, twice around it, round the back, fold it, going through, pulling that, and I've got that. And usually that's up there somewhere. And you could even do the same thing if you wanted to. You could put a half hitch in, and there you have it. Okay, so variations of that. Sometimes do that on the trunk of a tree itself. Now usually a trunk of a tree is tapered, so it gets skinnier as it goes up. So I could come up here and wrap it and tie it, and it's not going to drop down because obviously it gets a little thicker as it goes down, and there's usually a knot or a tiny little branch that just helps keep it up there. So if I had to tie my horse onto a trunk, didn't have good enough branches, or they just weren't available, didn't have them, they're way up there maybe, I could use the same knot for that.